We all know that feeling, right? You get a test back and your eyes just dart to the top of the page looking for that one letter, that one number. And for most of us, that grade felt like the end of the story, the final word. But today, we're going to look at a completely different way of thinking about this. And it all starts with a really simple question.
Yeah, what if that assessment, that test, wasn't a final judgment at all? What if it was actually a starting point, a signpost, telling you and your teacher exactly where to go next on your learning journey? You know, that one question is right at the heart of a massive shift in education, moving away from just measuring what you've learned to actively making the learning process better while it's still happening.
For a long time, the whole point of assessment was pretty much to sum everything up. But back in the 1990s, educators started to get this growing feeling that something was off. They realized that by focusing so much on the final score, that end result, we were missing this huge opportunity to actually help students get better while they were still in the middle of learning.
And this brings us to two really big ideas that sound similar but are worlds apart. On one side, you have assessment of learning. This is what we're all used to. It's summative. Think of a final exam that looks backward to tally up what you've learned. But on the other side, you have assessment for learning. This is formative. It's designed to form and shape the learning as it goes, looking forward to what comes next. The real difference isn't the test itself, it's the purpose. One measures the past, the other is all about guiding the future.
Honestly, the best way to wrap your head around assessment for learning, or AfL as it's often called, is to think of it like a GPS for education. See, a GPS doesn't just tell you when you've arrived at your destination. The whole point is that it helps you navigate the entire journey, right? Rerouting in real time to make sure you get where you're trying to go.
So, what is it exactly? Well, AfL isn't just another test or a special event. It's an approach that's completely woven into the day-to-day fabric of teaching. It's about creating this constant feedback loop. Feedback goes from the teacher to the student, sure, but just as important, it flows from the student back to the teacher. And this feedback isn't just a simple, good job. It's real information that's used to decide the very next steps for everyone in the classroom.
And that whole GPS idea, it really runs on three core questions. First, where is the learner going? That's your destination. You got to have a clear target. Second, where's the learner right now? This is like the GPS finding your current location. What do you understand? Where are the gaps? And finally, the most important one, how can the learner get there? This is the turn-by-turn navigation, using all that info to map out the best route forward. Okay, so this all sounds fantastic in theory, but you have to wonder, does it actually work? Well, this is where the story gets really interesting. Researchers decided it was time to peek inside the so-called black box of the classroom to figure out what really moves the needle for students.
And in 1998, two researchers, Paul Black and Dylan William, published this landmark study called Inside the Black Box. They dug through over 250 different studies on classroom assessment, and what they found was, honestly, a breakthrough. They discovered that this one particular practice had a massive, and up until then, unmeasured, impact on how well students learned.
And the scale of that impact was just staggering. Black and William concluded that when formative assessment is done well, it can speed up the rate of student learning by 50 to 70%. Now, just let that sink in. That is one of the biggest learning gains ever recorded for any single thing you can do in a classroom. It's a huge deal.
So, if the evidence is that powerful, it begs the question, right? Why isn't this happening in every single classroom everywhere? Well, like with any big idea, taking it from theory and putting it into practice comes with some pretty real-world challenges.
And here are some of the biggest hurdles. First off, it's easy to confuse the tool with the purpose. Thinking that just because you gave a quiz, you're doing formative assessment. But it's all about how you use the results. There's also the risk of just going through the motions, a kind of superficial box-ticking exercise where the real spirit of it gets lost. You also get pushback. Students and parents are really used to traditional grades. And of course, there are very real concerns about teacher workload if this isn't rolled out in a smart, supportive way.
But here's the good news. None of those challenges are impossible to overcome. The key is to move from just knowing what AfL is to really understanding how to make it happen, both at a whole school level and in a teacher's day-to-day work. For an entire school, it really starts with making this a genuine priority. That means things like ongoing professional development for teachers, not just a one-and-done mark shop. It means working together to create a school-wide assessment policy so everyone's speaking the same language. And crucially, it means making sure the feedback students get is actually high quality and actionable, and creating time for teachers to work together and learn from each other.
And then for teachers, right there in the classroom, it boils down to some really tangible strategies. Things like sharing the learning goals for a lesson in a way that's super clear to students, using simple tools like mini whiteboards so every single student can show their answer and you can see in an instant who's getting it, giving focused feedback that helps them improve, often without a grade attached, and even using those big old summative tests for a new purpose, analyzing the results to figure out what you need to reteach.
So we end up back here. Assessment for learning isn't really a set of techniques. It's a fundamental shift in mindset. It's about moving from a culture that's all about judging to one that's all about improving. It asks all of us to see every student not as a final product to be stamped with a grade, but as a work in progress, full of potential, on a journey that we can actively help them navigate. And when you think about it that way, well, that changes everything.